Hello, friends, and welcome to episode 92 of Stand Up. Joining me today, the Boston Globe's Michael Cohen and two legal professors duking it out over the future of abortion, why it matters, and a whole bunch of other constitutional law cases coming down from the Supreme Court this term. I'm Pete Dominick. It's time to stand up with me right now. Hello, hi. How you doing? How are you handling it all? Are you losing your mind every day? Are you finding a rhythm? Up and down? Mostly down? Mostly up? How's it going? I am doing really well, I gotta say. Mostly because I've found my groove. I got my groove back, according to a whole bunch of listeners, and it's overwhelming the positive feedback. You're really liking what I'm doing here. Variety of guests, daily podcasts, hearing from you, and I'm about to step it up with the listeners by setting up a phone number so you can call anytime. I may pick up, I may not. Stay tuned for that number. I'll be announcing how that's going to work in an upcoming episode. But now we are daily. I am daily. You are daily. And you are taking me with you. And Maureen R. writes, Pete, you are truly talented and doing an amazing job with your podcast. My husband and I love listening to your interviews with friends, family, authors, and professionals on a wide variety of topics. I love how much you share about your life because it helps us muster the strength to get through each day, which is a big challenge now. There is one category of guests, however, that I hope you do not interview: Trump supporters. She writes that I asked on my podcast whether or not listeners want to hear from these folks, and she says, I definitely do not. As a native Texan, and I'm surrounded by them. Anything you want to learn from a Trump supporter can be taken from a Sean Hannity or Laura Ingraham show. If you ever spend a lot of time in the South, you may better understand. We have plenty of like-minded friends here in Central Texas, so we're happy, but we're not blue yet. Thank you for your interesting, educational, and entertaining podcast. We look for them every day. Best to you and your family. Maureen, thank you. That was a very nice email, and I'm getting messages from many subscribers every day as well, and text messages and tweets. It's been great. Subscribe to the podcast by going to the subscribe link on this show, or just go to patreon.com/Pete Dominick or PeteDominick.com every day. Every single day, new people subscribe to the podcast, and that motivates and inspires me to go create new episodes with all kinds of different voices on all types of different issues each and every day. So thank you very much. I had a pretty good weekend. Watched a couple of movies, which is something I haven't done in a long time. I watched 1917 about World War I. It was very good. Sam Mendes, quite a director, as well as the movie Bombshell about the Fox News lawsuits with Gretchen Carlson, who I gotten to know really well, as played by Nicole Kidman, and Megyn Kelly, who I don't know, as played by Charlize Theron. Really, really good job by all of them. And a good movie, and I haven't watched anything, really. I also watched the Waco series on Netflix, but I haven't been watching much in the last 6 months, so I'm starting to try to let my hair down, even though I don't have any, and enjoy myself a little bit. I'm getting in the rhythm with the podcast every day, getting it done, and having a little extra time to distract and entertain myself. So that's been great, and I've been exercising a lot and eating well. My wife and I are getting along amazingly, and the girls are seemingly doing pretty well. How are your kids doing, if you have kids, if they're at home? And even if they're not, how is your family doing? It's really interesting to see people connecting with their family in ways that they haven't before, as well as making new friends. I've made so many new friends because of the podcast, and I am so grateful for all the new relationships and friendships I have in my life. And I look forward to hearing from you and meeting you. And now I want to get to today's guest, because almost every week I'm talking to Boston Globe columnist Michael Cohen, and I'm going to be having regular weekly guests. I'll be having 2, 3, 4, 5 guests on some episodes, as I did last Friday. People loved last Friday's episode. They also loved that episode, Maureen, with the Trump supporter. A lot of people really liked the way that I handled that, and I'll probably be talking to him again. But the thing about doing the show every day and having several guests an episode is you can kind of pick and choose what you like. If you listen to the whole thing from top to bottom, that's awesome. Thanks for taking me with you on your walk or wherever you're going. But if you just like this or that, that's great too. I'm trying to give you as much of a variety as I can in terms of segments and conversations and guests. And today we've got Boston Globe columnist Michael Cohen to talk about his most recent column titled Say It Loud, Say It Clear. Donald Trump needs to resign over his handling of the coronavirus. And I'm also joined today by two constitutional law professors. We did an entire hour on a Zoom chat. And it's Professor Eric Segall, who you know and love, and he invited his friend, Professor Michael Dorf of Cornell University, who runs the blog Dorf On Law, to debate whether or not the Supreme Court sending abortion back to states to decide what they're going to do is good politically for those of us who are pro-choice. And both of my guests are pro-choice and very pro-female and women's reproductive rights, but they see differently the political outcomes of a potential Supreme Court decision that would kick the right to abortion back to states. It's a fascinating conversation that we have about that with those two. And then we talk about a number of other cases that the Supreme Court is taking a look at as well. And I'm really proud of that conversation, and it's something a little different where you have dissenting points of view on something. I'd love to do that a lot more. I'm getting huge guests on the program. I'm doing it every day, and I can't do it without your support. So thank you for supporting me on Patreon, patreon.com/Pete Dominant. I hope you're hanging in there, and reach out to me if I haven't talked to you yet. I love reaching out to listeners and hearing from you and telling your stories. So if you haven't, please contact me, and I will do my best to get back to you. All right, now let's kick it off with my conversation with the Boston Globe's Michael Cohen right now. All right, he joins me every week because his column is that important, as is his newsletter. And this latest column at the Boston Globe has gone viral. Everybody is sharing it. Everybody is talking about it, as they should. Michael Cohen, congrats on that. Thank you for joining me, as always.
It's my pleasure, as always.
Say it loud, say it clear. Donald Trump needs to resign over his handling of the coronavirus. Let's get this out front. It took you a little while to get to it on the column, but it was perfectly well placed. It's this. You say, I'm under no illusion that Trump is going to resign. So why write it?
Because I think people should be saying it. I mean, I think we have sort of gone into this weird Twilight Zone kind of situation in which the president's just rank incompetence, the ongoing danger he represents, is just something that we kind of snark at, something we take for granted, something we're almost a nerd to. And it's just bizarre to me that you don't have more politicians, more editorial boards who are saying, look, this guy should resign. He needs to step down. And I know that again, I don't think it's going to happen, but I think it's a discussion we should be having. And I think it's something that Republicans should have to explain, have to answer for. I'd like them to explain to me, or to anybody, why it is that having Donald Trump president is good for the country, what value he's adding to the response to this virus. And I think they should be put on the spot about this.
So they being any of his defenders in Congress?
Any of them. You know, any of the outside people who support him, many people in Congress. And I also would say, too, I think it's also a situation in which it's a statement of principle. It's a way of saying, look, he is a dangerous, unqualified president who is causing damage to the country. And, you know, just because he won't step down doesn't mean we shouldn't acknowledge the fact that he is dangerous and unqualified. I just think that for whatever reason, we have just, and this goes, I wrote the same column, by the way, in September of last year after the Ukraine allegations came out. You know, and it's like, and then I was sort of shocked that no one was calling on him to resign. Look, calls of resignation of the president are very unusual. You know, I asked a Civil War historian if anybody ever called for Lincoln to resign, and he said he couldn't think of any.
Oh,
examples.
That's interesting, really, huh?
Yeah, but in modern times, the calls to resign have come for Nixon and for Clinton, and both were sort of because of crimes committed in office. So, with Trump, with the Ukraine stuff, he has a crime committed in office, he should resign. So it's different to say someone should resign over their handling of a crisis. But to my mind, this is not a normal situation. And I think that, it's just strange to me that we don't have more people out there saying, look, the guy is not just botched the response up to this point. He is every day actually putting Americans at harm. He's not doing anything to coordinate the response. And he makes public statements like you should consider ingesting disinfectants that literally put people's lives at risk. So, and I also referenced the fact in the piece that a couple of weeks ago, he talked about this anti-malarial drug that actually is more likely to kill you than to make you healthier.
Right. I can't say it. I'm going to try to say it, though. Hydroxychloroquine.
Chloroquine.
Hydroxychloroquine.
That's right.
Huh.
And it's a crazy thing that he is. It's look, if he just had botched the crisis, I wouldn't have written this piece. But it's that every day that he remains in office and every day that he's speaking publicly, he is putting the country at risk. And he's not, like I said before, he's adding no value. He's adding literally no value.
Well, he's adding no value, and he's actually telling people to poison themselves.
Yes.
This is really well put in the piece. You write, as remarkable as it is for the president to be suggesting the use of unproven drugs, Trump topped it on Thursday when he suggested that ultraviolet rays and cleaning disinfectants injected into the body should be examined as possible treatments for coronavirus. Of course, he then the next day said it was sarcastic, and we don't need to get stuck in that echo chamber ping pong ball of following that around. But what, if anything, do you think, Michael, his absolute ineptitude and suggestions to take drugs and try horrible things does to his approval rating of how he's handling this crisis overall? Does anything shake the hardcore supporters, even insinuating that you should inject disinfectants into your body?
Well, look, there's no question that these press conferences have hurt him, and the response has hurt him. I mean, you can't look at his poll numbers and not come to that conclusion. I mean, every national poll shows Joe Biden leading him. State polls show Biden leading. You're seeing a real loss of support for Trump among older voters, who, of course, are people that are most affected by COVID-19. So I do think it's having a political effect. But in that sense, I think, and I think you're seeing Republicans who are kind of freaking out over the fact that it's having an effect. And I think it's one of the reasons why he's going to stop doing these. At least we'll see if it holds. My guess is a week from now, he'll be back doing the press briefings because he's nothing else to do. He has nothing else to do. I mean, that's the thing that's crazy, too, is that he doesn't attend the task force meetings. He gets up and spends all day watching television. He can't go to rallies, can't play golf. He has nothing else to do.
He needs to always be talked about, and he needs to actually hear and see people talking about him to the point he's also always has to listen to TV and radio, and he's constantly watching people talk about him.
Yes.
And so his advisors realize this, and so they have to present things in a way that somehow is about him, and that's just an impossible task with most of the responsibilities of the executive branch.
Well, I mean, there was this extraordinary piece. I think it was in the Times. Yeah, it was in the Times that sort of charted, what's it like in the White House with Trump. And one thing that apparently he doesn't go to task force meetings, but when the coronavirus task force meetings, but when he does go, he just talks about his appearances at the briefings and what kind of response they're getting.
Really?
He talks about his press coverage. He does not care. There was something today in the Washington Post, about they looked at all the different statements that he's made. He's, first of all, taken up 60% speaking time in these press briefings. Guess how many minutes he's devoted toward expressing sympathy for the people whose lives have been lost.
Oh, that someone measured that? Go ahead.
Yeah. Just take a guess. How many minutes or hours?
A few?
4.5 minutes.
Yeah, about 3-4 minutes.
And more time defending his administration and defending the response than he has actually showing compassion for those who have died.
Someone wrote that there's rumors that Kim Jong-un has died, and someone tweeted he'll spend more time mourning Kim Jong-un than he will.
Of course he will. They were in love. I mean, of course you talk that way about somebody that you love, right?
So what about the administration? We were talking before we started taping about, the interviews with Dr. Birx and Dr. Fauci, and how a lot of journalists are trying to get them to admit that the president's a fucking insane person, and they're not going to do that. And you're looking at it as saying that's a waste of time, and it's not helpful because you want Dr. Birx and you want Dr. Fauci there advising him. You don't want him dismissing them and appointing Dr. Oz and Dr. J.
So maybe Dr. J would be better, actually. I am the one person, and I may even write a column about this, who will defend Dr. Birx. She has said some things that have been problematic. I mean, she did, for example, refuse to condemn the thing in the governor of Georgia opening up, tattoo parlors and massage parlors and so forth. But here's the thing. She and Fauci are the last line of defense to some extent. They're the only two people around him who seem to have any, who are adults and who have some understanding of the science seem to have some sway over Trump. And the last thing that we should want is for either one of them to be fired. And if Dr. Birx gets asked a question about, to talk about Trump's comments about using disinfectants, and she says, well, obviously he's a moron, she's going to lose her job, which is, just the way things go in this administration. I don't want her to lose her job. I would like her to be, as flawed as she might be, and as little as the president listens to her, I'd rather that she be in that position than have, like you said, Dr. Oz. And here's the thing. Between you and me, would either one of us be shocked if he fired Birx and gave Dr. Oz the job?
No. And I also don't know why anybody would say between you and me on a podcast. I mean, it defies, I'm taping, right?
I meant also my imaginary friend who is also listening. And
no, I think that's.
My dog is here somewhere, so I'm including him as well.
I agree. I actually agree with you on this, and I think often of General McMaster, who I was no fan of, but who I wanted to see, stay there in once he was dismissed. Not to mention, a number of other people who I wanted at least, Mattis and others. So you've called for the resignation of the president for this sentence at the end of your piece, the Boston Globe. I read it and then I read it again and I said, I can't believe this is our reality. This is it. Calling for the resignation of a president who muses about the use of household cleaning products to fight a deadly virus is not a partisan exercise or a futile plea for political sanity. It's common sense. I guess maybe I would edit that sentence to say muses about injecting household cleaning products into your.
I'll send a note to my editor about that.
Yeah, but it's such a wild thing that he did and the way that he did it, and no one could imagine, even a mayor of a crazy town,
even a mayor
of a crazy town on like an animated TV show. The Onion, everybody's popping that piece, that post from The Onion from about a month ago when they suggested that the president would say something like this, and then he did.
I mean, so the thing is, he wasn't being sarcastic, obviously, but I think Birx made this comment that he was just sort of musing publicly about whether this would work. And I mean,
it's all she could do. What else could she say?
That's actually more of an indictment. What kind of an idiot thinks that ingesting a disinfectant that you use to clean your counter with is something that could actually treat a deadly virus? Like, how stupid do you have to be?
But he's very stupid, but it's more this. I was talking to my old man about this. We're fascinated by how this could happen. And it's more, most presidents, mayors, governors, they would listen to their advisors, their experts, in this case, the scientists and doctors, and they would hear all the different scenarios. And they might then go and present the different scenarios that they have heard from the generals, the doctors, the scientists. We could do this and this could happen. We could do that and that could happen. But no one would make one up off the cuff.
But of all the things to make up, that you're going to make up the idea that you should inject like cleaning disinfectants? Like who, it's like you don't make that up. You don't say that because everyone knows that you don't drink or ingest disinfectants.
Apparently they don't. I mean, I want to make a joke, but apparently they don't because people are dying from doing this.
No, I mean, this is what should disturb you about the state of America right now, that hundreds of people apparently have now taken someone I read about a case of somebody that mixed bleach and mouthwash and gargled it. I mean, what?
Well, that's not that unreasonable, because if you want to smell good and have your mouth be colorless. The best joke, by the way, I heard, and it was like these kind of things, when he lays an egg like this, it gets eaten alive by anybody with a sense of humor on social media so quickly. It's like, oh, what's left? But the best one I heard was something about him, he's such a white supremacist. He wants us to be white on the inside as well. I like that angle. I can't believe I didn't think of that one.
I actually like President Tide Pod. That was one of my favorites.
Yeah. And people are having fun with the graphics and mocking up Clorox tablets Clorox chewables. Everybody saw that.
I don't know if you saw I had a tweet about this because I know you like my tweets about.
You're very good on Twitter. I followed you and was fond of you and a fan of you on Twitter before I even knew that you were a serious Boston Globe columnist. What do you got?
I wrote that I said I'm having a Trumptini, which was a picture of Maker's Mark, a glass of ice, and a spray bottle of Clorox.
Why is it going to be a spray bottle?
Well, you want to make sure you can modulate how much you put into the glass. You don't want to go crazy there. Right?
What do you make, Michael, of this week? The fascinating situation where the governor of Georgia, who is this hardcore Trump supporter and got elected, jumping on the Trump bandwagon, the whole beat Stacey, what's her last name? Abrams, and all of the hijinks behind that. But Brian Kemp's his name. And this week he said he's going to reopen Georgia. And it seemed like it was a direct appeal to the president, who was saying, liberate all these other states. It sounded like a great move for him to do exactly, to get close to the president, to be loyal to the president. And the president one day said to reporters he can do whatever he wants, and the next day he threw him under the bus very harshly, said his name over and over and how much he disagreed with it. What is that dynamic? What does it mean for Brian Kemp? And what does it mean for the rest of the potential people who want to work with this guy?
So first of all, AP did report that Kemp had run the plan by Pence and Trump, and they both approved it.
That's right. I did see that. Yeah. So they approved of it.
Yes, they did. I have never think about Brian
They approved
Kemp.
of it privately before they disapproved of it publicly? No, they approved of it privately, then publicly, then disapproved of it publicly.
That's right.
Crazy.
Yeah, think about I think the thing to remember about Brian Kemp is that Brian Kemp compared to a box of rocks makes a box of rocks look like a Mensa candidate. Okay? That's the thing you have to remember.
I had Bud Light in my mouth. I don't know what time you're listening to this podcast, folks. Sorry if that ruined it, but that definitely came through my nose. Box of rocks gets me every time. Yeah.
So, I usually prefer Dumber Than a Buick, but I'll go with Box of Rocks this time. Not everyone gets that.
I usually say Pence stupid, like he's Pence stupid.
No, Kemp is in a whole tier of stupidity. You have to remember that Brian Kemp, when he ran for governor, ran an ad in which, I'm not making this up, he had a shotgun pointed at a young man who wants to take his daughter out on a date.
Yeah.
Now, keep in mind that he still won a majority of the vote in Georgia, so that tells you a lot about the electorate.
The strain of patriarchal authoritarianism in support of Donald Trump is one of
holding a shotgun.
Yeah,
in a commercial.
Yeah, because he's got to protect his daughter because you can't protect yourself because he's the Batman. Those kind of guys.
And the proper way to respond to a young man taking your daughter is to put a shotgun on his body.
That'll really make the daughter happy, and it'll make the guy keep coming back too. It's a great plan.
Really, in no way I think will it cause any kind of long-term problems for the daughter. None whatsoever. None. I think she'll be completely healthy and normal. No issues at all. Definitely not.
You and I both have two daughters. This idea that somehow somebody, God forbid, sexually assaulted them or worse, that we're going to show up like the Punisher later on that week is it just.
But nothing even happened, by the way. He's want to take her on a date.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Holding a shotgun.
But anyway, the point is he shows loyalty. He shows
stupid.
He shows loyalty. We're talking over each other. Sorry. He shows loyalty, and then Brian Kemp gets screwed for it.
Yeah, Brian Kemp sort of says, oh, well, Trump is saying we should open up. I'm going to really push the envelope here, get Trump to sign off on it. And, of course, then Trump throws him under the bus, which is a reminder that I don't understand why Republicans don't remember this fact, that Donald Trump has loyalty to nobody, not to his friends, not to his political allies, he doesn't have any friends, I shouldn't say that, political allies, to his family, to his staff, to anybody. And so throwing Brian Kemp under the bus is, he's happy to do it. He has no problem. He'll throw anybody under the bus who he thinks has, harmed him some way.
I think the best example of that is Jeff Sessions.
Jeff Sessions is the best example, who is, by the way, a garbage human. I mean, I'm going to be honest and say that.
How dare you talk about? He's a human being. Don't call him a piece of garbage.
Okay, you're right. I shouldn't have said that. We should edit that out. He is more of a bad man. He's a bad man. Okay, and yet, he actually came across in that situation as looking somewhat reasonable by not recusing himself from the Russia investigation.
Yeah. And he was the first senator to support Donald Trump, and the loyalty of that.
The first person to support him, and then what happens? He throws him under the bus.
And he's still trying to get Trump on Trump's good side because he's running for Senate again, and Trump is not having it, right?
He endorsed his opponent in Alabama in Senate.
That's crazy.
Because Trump only holds grudges.
Michael, okay, so the final question. If last week was eat Clorox tablets, what possibly could happen this week? Apparently he's not going to give the press conferences anymore, which he can't. There's no way he's going to be able to continue to not come out in front of cameras. He can't resist it. What do you predict?
He will go back to doing these press briefings because literally he has nothing else to do. So I expect at some point he will be out again, and he'll do something and say something even dumber than he said already. I mean, I'll be honest with you, it's kind of hard to top injecting clean disinfectants. Yeah. That's going to be hard to top. But if anybody can do it, the president can. I have confidence in him.
Finally, I do want to ask you one more question. There is a presidential campaign underway, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. And now there are more allegations. There's a little more strength to the allegations against Joe Biden on sexual assault from a woman who worked for him in his Senate office back in, I guess, the 90s. Do you see this as something that needs to be continued to look at, and what kind of damage does it do to Joe Biden?
I haven't followed the story that closely. I'll be honest. I read the Times article about it. My view of this is, if there are other women who come forward and make kind of allegations against Biden, I think that, it gets a lot more credibility. But one allegation 25 years ago, it's a little hard to accept it as fact, I guess is what I'd say. I think the thing I remember sort of about Brett Kavanaugh was, had it been one allegation against him, it would have been, okay, well, maybe it's just one allegation. Right. Who knows what to think of it? But it was multiple allegations.
Right.
And I think with Biden, the allegations always been a little too touchy-feely, which I think is certainly true. But this is like sexual assault in a hallway in the Senate office building, which seems, a little out of character for Biden. And I'm not saying it didn't happen, but I guess I'm a little skeptical until if it's just a one-off accusation against him.
I've never said this anywhere, and I've been planning on saying it somewhere, but it's not a big deal. But my wife and daughter met Joe Biden one time in Nantucket, where we have friends. And my wife was really excited to meet him, and he kissed Ava, who was then probably 12 years old, like on the head, on top of the head.
Yeah.
And she keeps talking about, she's like, I hope Joe Biden wins. He kissed me on the head. And it's just kind of interesting. That was her reaction. He's an old man
right.
giving her a kiss on the head.
Right.
And I don't know. I give old men a little bit more rope in terms of the way they're physically affectionate towards both little boys and girls. I had no.
I think also that's just Biden's nature. I mean, I definitely when I spent time on the campaign trail with him, he's just a very tactile person. I mean, personally, it wouldn't work for me so much. I mean, I think it would make me a little bit uncomfortable if he was very touchy-feely with me. But a lot of people respond positively to it. And I don't think it's really because he is creepy. I think it's just the way that he interacts with people. And I think there are people who are like that. There are definitely people who are more tactile and are more touchy. And I think he has gotten some comeuppance that. And I think, frankly, rightfully so. I think some women have been made uncomfortable by it. But this allegation goes a lot further. I mean, this argues that he physically, sexually assaulted her.
Yeah.
And I'm just being honest. It's hard to know what to make of it, but I'll say that it's hard for me to believe it. And I think my general rule on a lot of these allegations is if it's a one-off allegation, I'm a little bit suspicious, and unless there's obviously hard evidence. But if there's a pattern of behavior, then I'm more likely to take it seriously.
Yeah. All right, Michael Cohen. Read him at the Boston Globe, especially this piece, and subscribe to his newsletter, which comes out every Thursday, Truth and Consequences. Get his books and follow him on Twitter at SpeechBoy71. I always appreciate when you join me, which is every week. It means a lot. I love reading your columns. I love talking to you, and people love when we talk. So thank you very much, sir.
Always a pleasure, my friend. Thanks for having me.
Okay, there you go. Michael Cohen on Twitter at SpeechBoy71. Everybody, get his books and follow him on Twitter and subscribe to his weekly email as well. Really smart guy. Always love and enjoy our conversations. And I thought that was as good as always with Michael, and really appreciate his time. Follow him on Twitter at SpeechBoy71. Read his stuff. Subscribe to the Boston Globe. All right, up next, the feature event. of today's episode 92. You've got Professor Eric Segall, who invited Professor Michael Dorf on to join conversation about abortion. I give an introduction here, but you can see and read their posts at Dorf On Law, where they talking right about what we are about to talk about right here on the show, if you'd like, and that's linked in the show notes as well. It's a great conversation. We talk about a number of issues. The Supreme Court is extremely consequential in our lives, and who better to talk to than these two law professors right now. I'm very excited that I have two very respected legal minds, professors of constitutional law, joining me for today's discussion to talk about pretty much the most important, consequential issues of our time. So it couldn't be any more important, one might argue. And you know Eric Segall because he joins me regularly. He's a constitutional law professor. He's an author. He is the Kathy and Lawrence Ashe Professor of Law at Georgia State University. And also joining us today is Michael Dorf. He is the Robert S. Stevens Professor of Law at Cornell Law School. And if only your namesakes for your chairs could know that you're both joining me, Pete Dominic, I can imagine they would be more proud, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Mine's alive. Mike, is yours alive?
No, he's a former dean of Cornell Law School.
Okay.
But his family is still alive. So.
Well, either way, what an honor for them to have you join me in this very important conversation. Gentlemen, I appreciate you both joining me today, and I hope everybody will check out dorfonlaw.org, which is the blog that Michael created. How would you describe what folks will find there and why you started this?
So it's a mix of legal commentary, some economics, a lot of politics, and then occasionally something else that strikes my fancy, or Eric's, or that of Neil Buchanan, or Diane Klein, or Sherry Culp, or any of the other people who blog for me regularly. The reason I started it is actually sort of funny, which is I signed up for some web hosting to post my CV online when I was frustrated that the law school I was currently affiliated with at the time was doing a bad job. And I had all this extra space. So I thought, well, I'll just put a blog up there. And that was 14 years ago.
Oh, that explains my career as well. I had 5 minutes of comedy, but I was given 15, so I had to fill it. All right.
Hey, Pete,
Yeah.
Before we start, you know me and my technical limitations. Are people seeing my name as Daisy Alex when this gets posted?
I think they probably will.
Can you explain that then, please?
No one can.
Okay.
So when we started the Zoom, as most people realize now using Zoom, I started it. I am the host, and I invited these gentlemen to join me. And first was Daisy Alex. Daisy Alex wants to join the Zoom. And I'm like, no, motherfucker, you can't join I don't know who you are. You're not invited. I only invited Eric Segall and Michael Dorf to this important discussion. And so I was like, well, it's got to be one of them. Maybe they're using somebody else's computer. So I clicked on and admitted Daisy Alex, and up comes Segall, and he reports have no relationship or familiarity with any person with those two words in their name. But so I can't.
I think Mike put it there to throw me off, Pete.
Oh yeah, he's that kind of guy.
Somehow he.
The only thing Mike put in to throw us off is his backdrop, so let's just ignore it. He's at a library where people are not practicing social distancing, so that should probably help you understand where he's starting. Okay, so guys, we're talking about abortion today, and a really important Supreme Court case that is about to be decided. And Eric, you wrote at Dorf On Law a piece called "The Pro-Choice Progressive Argument for the Court Overturning Roe and Casey," these two Supreme Court cases that deal with the issue. And then, Michael, you responded with a piece at the blog at dorfonlaw.org titled, "What's Wrong with Professor Segall's Win by Losing Approach to Abortion?" And just before we even get to this, two things I want to explain. Number one, I love that there's a place, in this case, Dorf On Law, the blog, where people can have a vigorous debate. I mean, Michael, you really call Eric out on a number of his arguments, and it's great, and you back him up. It's not personal. It's really thoughtful. It's well argued. It seems that is a province of the nature of the work that you guys are in, academics, constitutional law professors, lawyers even. but the most of America can't even have a thoughtful argument. Michael, first of all, a word about, the blog and how you're able to host and post someone's, opinion here that you really don't agree with.
Right. Well, so first of all, it helps to be obscure so that, when I do get discovered occasionally by the mass audience, there are, more vitriolic, sort of web typical responses. But, look, it's in the nature of being a scholar to take ideas seriously, to realize that you can disagree with somebody and still respect that person's intellect. I've been very lucky that the people who comment on my blog, I'm just talking about readers now, for the most part, not entirely, but they will comment on the merits. They'll disagree strongly, and even when occasionally you get a sort of trollish comment, what I try to do is either ignore it or respond as though it is intended in good faith. And I've found, over the years that even if it's not originally intended in good faith, if you respond that way, people tend to respond on the merits. Yeah. So the other thing is that although Eric and I are disagreeing about, a prediction here, where it's not a fundamental clash of values, we say we both basically have the same normative goals, and so in that sense, it's not that hard for us to disagree agreeably.
Yeah, on that point, Pete, Mike and I both want safe, secure, safe abortions for women. Inexpensive, safe abortions for women all over the country. So we agree on the baseline thing. We think we disagree about how the best way to get there is, given how bad a hand we've been dealt.
Okay, well, exactly. And given so now the next thing is obviously saying that we are three men talking about women's reproductive rights. And I'll say, it's my show. I invited the two of you on because you know each other well, have a familiarity with each other, and have a lot of scholarship on the issue. And it was easy to book. I mean, I'm just saying. I mean, I would have loved to have Dahlia Lithwick here, or any number, or somebody else. Women who might not even agree, but I don't. So we can put that on me, and I don't think that you guys conceding to do the debate says much about you as it does me. But if you want to add anything to the fact that I've got the two of you, or maybe the two of you are arguing about this issue on the blog, and yet neither of you are females. Is there anything to say about that, Michael?
So I do have a book on abortion that is co-authored with an actual genuine woman.
Who happens to be Mike's wife, by the way.
Oh,
right. And also my colleague. So that's, and so of course I'll plug the book. It's called Beating Hearts, Abortion and Animal Rights, published by Columbia University Press. And so, but yeah, I mean, I'm who I am. I have views. They're a product of my experiences, and I'd like to think of having listened to a lot of people with different experiences.
And you can get that book in the show notes for today's podcast. It's linked in there. Eric, what would you add to that? You're a man.
Well, I think in a perfect world, we'd have both a anti-choice person talking, right, and maybe a woman. But on the other hand, what generated this podcast, I think, was my blog that, even though Mike disagreed with, he was, he agreed to publish. And really, it's a controversial issue that I don't think the female perspective is necessary to discuss, because we're really talking about politics in a way that is gender neutral, I think, in some way, in the sense of how it's going to spin out. Because what Mike and I fundamentally disagree about is what the Supreme Court should do with the case that's being decided this June.
All right, so let me just ask you this then to start. Is this a legal analysis that we're about to go into, or is it more of a political analysis? Is it a little of both, Eric?
I think Mike wrote an amicus brief in that case. So I'm going to defer to Mike to describe the case, fairly briefly. And he has his priors, but he's going to, I know Mike, he's going to describe it fairly. Then we're going to get into politics because, Pete, law is politics all the way down.
Okay, so Mike, explain what an amicus brief is for my audience, and then what yours.
So amicus curiae is Latin for friend of the court. When the Supreme Court hears almost every case these days, in addition to briefs by the parties, they also accept briefs by interested outsiders, and it's fancifully called this amicus brief. These can be trade groups, they can be nonprofits, they can be states that are not involved directly in the case. In this case, it's a brief by a bunch of law professors. And our position in the case is that the court ought to strike down the Louisiana law that's at stake in the case. Now, if you want, I can go into explain what the law involves and try to do that as briefly as possible.
Well, I do, and I want to get to that in a minute, but a little bit more background as well. I think it's important for listeners, and if we post the video of this, viewers to know that you also clerked for Justice Kennedy, and that's important because he had a vote on these cases. And it's also important to mention that you clerked for Supreme Court Justice, whereas Eric Segall did not clerk for a Supreme Court Justice. I think people.
This is my friend. I
think people should know.
That. I'm also a lot taller.
Is that right?
Yes, but I could box him out though, because I could box Mike.
Settle down, Daisy Alex. So anyway, but all right. So let me start with this. Do you both agree that the Supreme Court is eventually going to return the issue of abortion to the states? Michael, do you agree with that? I forget which one of you wrote that sentence.
So Eric thinks that. My view is that the future is fundamentally unknowable. I am frequently asked by my students whether they should go work for one law firm or another. And I always tell them, this is a very consequential decision you're about to make. You have no idea how to decide because the things that are going to make a difference are completely random. You know, what person you meet on some business trip. I think that the Supreme Court is that way because our political system is like that. It's chaotic, like the weather. I think if I were betting, I would bet on the Supreme Court at least paring back substantially on the abortion right. But I think that anybody who confidently predicts the outcome, given all the imponderables, including electoral ones, has a false sense of confidence.
Eric, you have a false sense of confidence because you're the one predicting that.
No, my prediction comes with humility. Mike is not. My piece is really a rooting piece. This is what I want the court to do more than this is what the court is going to do this term. If I had to bet on this Louisiana case, and real quickly, it doesn't matter. We've talked about it before, Pete. Doctors have to have admitting privileges within 30 miles of a hospital to be able to.
That's the case that you guys are arguing about. That's the case before the court this term.
Yes.
That you're
and the Supreme Court invalidated this exact same law 4 years ago in Texas. And so it's kind of a mystery why they granted Stewart to take the case. What's changed is Kavanaugh and Gorsuch have replaced, Scalia and Kennedy.
And what would you add? What would you add to that, Michael? His just setting up the Louisiana.
Well, I wasn't finished.
Excuse me.
I disagree with Michael about one essential thing. Okay. There are many Supreme Court cases that we don't know how they're going to come out, but there are many Supreme Court cases we can predict with a 98% certainty how they are going to come out because we can count votes. So this is not one of them, by the way. This abortion case is not one of them. But in general, if you take abortion, affirmative action, and all that stuff for the last 20 years, the front page cases, we can predict with pretty good certainty at least what the vote's going to be. It's rare they surprise us in front page cases.
Okay.
Yeah. So let me just qualify what I said before. I think we're not fundamentally disagreeing. When I said the future is fundamentally unknowable, I didn't mean that it's unknowable in all cases how the current justices are going to vote on a particular case. What I meant was if an issue is not going to be decided potentially for 5 or 10 years, we don't know who the personnel are going to be on the court. We don't know how they're going to vote. So that was the nature of my qualification.
All right, so I think now we should probably move on to the case that you first made, Eric, in your piece at Dorf On Law, Abortion, Judicial Review, and Playing a Terrible Hand. You set it up. You say we're in a bad situation for the future of women's reproductive rights no matter what because of who is in charge. The president of the United States is Donald Trump. The Supreme Court is who is on the Supreme Court and the precedent for where they are and stand on the issue of abortion, especially the Chief Justice and the two new additions. I should argue all of the quote conservative justices. We kind of know where they are on the abortion. So you take it from there. So you're saying that this case, the Louisiana case, you hope what?
I hope. Well, so Justice Roberts at the lower court decision upheld this law based on factual distinctions from the Texas case that Mike and I both agree are ridiculous and absurd and don't distinguish the two cases. And Justice Roberts asked a few questions along those lines, which I think people misinterpreted. I think people thought he was asking those questions to see if there was a factual difference. I think he was asking those questions to show there isn't, and the only way to uphold this law is to reverse Roe and Casey. But let me get to my main point. In 2016, 21%, 1 in 5 voters said the Supreme Court was the biggest issue to them. Of that 1 in 5, 56% voted for Donald Trump. Those are huge numbers when he won 3 swing states by less than a football stadium. So even a small change in how the election goes could make a big difference. I think abortion is the single most important issue to evangelicals. I think evangelicals are a huge part of Trump's support. And I think that if the court does not reverse Roe and Casey, which is what they're probably not going to do that, and then Trump can make abortion an issue again. If the Supreme Court were to reverse Roe and Casey, it's going to be much harder for Trump to make abortion an issue by waving around lists of judges and talking about Justice Scalia. Now, if I thought Roe and Casey were secure for the next 10 years, I would say, no, I'm pro-choice and I'd rather have that. Unlike Mike, I am somewhere between 80 and 100%, 90% sure that Roe and Casey will not be with us within a few years. That being the case, playing poker, that's a prediction, but I'm 80% sure.
All right,
that being the case, I would rather them take the issue out of the election now than after the election. And one last thing. Part of this is an emotional plea on my heart. I want to think that Justice Roberts, who has just been a horrific justice, in my opinion, in many different ways, the author of Shelby County, the author of a terrible affirmative action decision, voted with majority in Citizens United. I would like to think that he hates Trump as much as the three of us do, because I think he might be a civil man, from what I've heard. I think he might be a guy who takes integrity seriously, maybe. And maybe, he doesn't want Trump reelected. And if he doesn't want Trump reelected, and he's going to reverse Roe and Casey anyway, do it now.
But there's so many assumptions, and it's purely political analysis here that, number one, that if you took the issue of abortion off the chart, that the right-wing evangelical right would lose a lot of their enthusiasm. And I think
all we need is some.
Well, I think Michael makes a really good point in his piece with they'll replace it with plenty of other things, number one. And you're also making an assumption that Roberts thinks, by the way, that your political analysis is right, that this very animating issue of abortion, which is also so animating, would really make that much of a difference. Michael?
So, yeah, you anticipated some of my response, which is, if you think about the modern Republican Party, right, it really dates to realignment in the 1960s following Nixon's so-called Southern strategy, which mobilized the existing coalition primarily through issues of racial resentment. Abortion comes later, and it comes with the sort of rise of political activism among religious conservatives. Abortion is undoubtedly one of those issues, but it's not the only one. There's also prayer in schools. There's opposition to gay rights, including but not limited to same-sex marriage. In recent years, gun rights have become extremely important for this coalition. So there's a whole constellation of issues that people get mobilized around, some of which are about the Supreme Court. So when those 56% of the 18% say they care about the Supreme Court, not all of that is abortion. Some of that is about gun rights, for example. And of course, we live in an era in which people's views and how adamantly they pursue them does not just come from within, it's also manipulated and motivated by political actors, right? So politicians are very good at finding wedge issues and then using them. So I would also add that the court overturning Roe and Casey would not take abortion out of politics. It would just shift the frame. And I want to make 2 points about that. One is that the conventional wisdom is that if the right wins on abortion by getting Roe and Casey overturned, they'll say, great, done our job, let's go home. That's not generally the way politics works. Usually people who win are sort of excited, and they often want to then pursue further goals. But second, there will be all sorts of subsidiary issues. For example, how do we now preserve our advantage in the court? And so we want to continue to elect presidents who are sympathetic to us. Can we get people in Congress who are going to support our legislation? What about the president who's going to sign that legislation? So I think it's again, right, going back to my original framing, politics is like the weather. You take one piece out, it doesn't mean that everything else stays the same.
Yeah, let me respond to that, Pete. I really want to say a few personal things about it, actually. So unlike the two of you, I have lived in the South for 40 years, while growing up in New York. I want to tell a story that I'm not using it for empirical proof, but I do think it reflects what I'm talking about and is in fact indicative of this whole conversation. When I got married to Lynn, my wife, we said no presents, except no presents. But if you want to do something, donate to a homeless shelter or to Planned Parenthood, because we met when I gave a talk at Planned Parenthood. And my wife has cousins she's very close to who are evangelicals. Was close to it growing up. They're evangelicals in Michigan. And because we made Planned Parenthood a voluntary, gift, they boycotted our wedding. And
that's the reason they gave,
No, that's fair. It was the real reason.
I wish everybody would give a choice of offensive nonprofits.
No, but that's my point, though.
Yeah.
See, they would not have they care about guns, some. They care about gay rights.
What is your point in remarking about this one, this family?
My point is that I'm going to make a very obnoxious point. So Reva Segall and Linda, no relation, and Linda Greenhouse are two eminent, one law professor, one former New York Times Supreme Court reporter, who have written a lot about Roe and Casey from a feminist perspective and backlash. They're wrong on every level. And I think Mike is really wrong here when he underestimates the double whammy of abortion combined with the Supreme Court putting it down their throats. See, that's where I think the conventional wisdom among law professors is really wrong, although some people do agree with me on this. Mike is right. Abortion politics will move to the legislature, obviously, if Roe and Casey is overturned.
Another good point, yeah.
But listen, the New York Times headline, Supreme Court overturns Roe, deflates so much of the evangelical right. And more importantly than that, I have personally, again, I'm not using this for data, but on Facebook, so many people, we held our nose to vote for Trump because of abortion. And I have no doubt there are, not the leaders, but there are evangelicals out there who voted for Trump because of abortion. If I thought Roe and Casey were going to stick around, then I would say, so we're really disagreeing. I think Mike said it, by the way, Mike said in his response to me, if I am right that Roe and Casey are not going to be around, and if I am right that taking them away would affect the election, he might jump aboard my train. So my argument isn't that far-fetched. Mike is just disagreeing with the factual predicate.
The one point that I have to make that neither of you made, and Michael got closest, and I feel really smart even submitting this to a conversation between you two nerds, is, Michael just said politicians are good at finding other wedge issues. And neither of you wrote about or has mentioned yet, and maybe this is just bullshit, that Donald Trump doesn't need, this is different, it's Trump politics. This isn't examining traditional politics or what a lot of people refer to as conventional wisdom. He doesn't need traditional wedge issues that animate people. They're important. He gets on them.
But Pete, I'll
tell you what.
Why did he take a list? He was the first candidate in history, I think, to have a list of Supreme Court nominees.
Yeah, brilliant.
He literally enlisted the Federalist Society.
It doesn't mean it doesn't. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. doesn't mean that that isn't true. What I'm saying is, if he didn't have abortion, if he didn't have guns, remember what he did before the 2018 election. We can argue that it didn't work. You probably will. All he talked about was a caravan. He doesn't need your traditional issues. He tells people to drink chlorine, and they do. They do. I mean, it's not. He tells people not to get vaccinated, and they won't. So he doesn't need these issues, Michael.
Yeah, so I want to totally agree with that. Brilliant of you to think of that before.
He's Koreshian.
Yeah.
Oh my God, Mike is totally kissing up.
I agree. So it is now a conventional trope in political science, and I think it is true, that our politics are tribal. And what is meant by that is that attachments come first, issues come second. So, you say, well, these people, what they really care about is abortion. They do. They care about abortion. They care about a lot of things, but they care most about is a kind of identity. And so look at the move on the Republican Party on free trade, right? So pre-Trump, both parties are sort of free trade, but the Republican Party especially. Trump is against free trade, and so that's the dominant view on the right. And you can find, by the way, you can find similar things on the left as well.
And by the way, both sides, because I've talked about that issue a lot, have no idea the first thing about trade. No idea how it works.
I want to say that I agree with everything you both of you guys have said, and what Mike was just about to say, but I interrupted him. I agree with every single thing about that. But none of that is germane. None of it. To my point, that 78,000 people, I think, in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin or Ohio, I forget which, 78,000 people separated Trump from Hillary Clinton. And the single most important, I agree with Mike about personality, but if there was ever a president who might lose some people in his party if a wedge issue is taken away based on his personality, it is Donald Trump.
So why is that precision argument not right, Michael? That he's not saying that it's going to animate, or what's the opposite of animate? De-animate the public. He's talking about enough. It will matter to enough voters in the right states. Why is that wrong?
So let me give you two explanations. One is I want to contest Eric's anecdotal account of the importance of the Supreme Court to abortion. I don't disagree that people care passionately about abortion. I do disagree somewhat that it's mostly about the Supreme Court. So Lucinda Finley, who's a law professor at the University of Buffalo, wrote a chapter for a book I edit called Constitutional Law Stories on the backstory of Roe v. Wade. And what she tells is a story in which the deep opposition to legal abortion precedes Roe v. Wade. There's a conventional story that liberals tell themselves that, we were about to reach a compromise, everything was going to work out nicely, and then the Supreme Court took the issue away from the people. What Finley finds, based on actual data, not talking to one of her friends who didn't show up at her wedding, is that people were being motivated. They were voting on the issue. There was organizing, and it's about a certain cultural understanding. And it's not primarily about the Supreme Court. Yes, it's been channeled into politics around the Supreme Court, but it's not exclusively about that. So I want to question the premise.
Mike, before you make your second point,
let me get to my second point, right? And the second point is that I don't disagree with Eric that you can find particular issues that are going to push one over the edge in a close election. The question is this the right one, right? There are probably other issues where you could find that, if the Democratic Party changed its view about transgender rights, that would get you 12 additional voters in Michigan.
Or reparations, or how you get, universal health care or something. That would get you,
right. Hold on a minute. First of all, in Supreme Myths, I cite Lucinda Finley all over my chapter on abortion. So, I think she's a great scholar and all that. Mike, I don't understand why what happened in 1960 matters to this issue. The history of this is in Roe 73, 7-2. 7-2, not 5-4, 7-2. In 75 and 76, there is no big deal about it. In fact, Jerry Falwell, I believe in the mid-70s, was asked about abortion. He said, I don't care. Who cares? What happened was Ronald Reagan, Ed Meese, combined, well, it was really Ed Meese, who had the evangelical connection, in the late 70s, made abortion the issue for the Republican Party, combined with, quote, an activist Supreme Court. And Lucinda's story is perfect prior to that point. But at that point in time, everything changes. And Reagan calls it a Holocaust, right? He calls abortion a Holocaust, while he is saying the Supreme Court is destroying our country. It is those two things.
Well, that history. Is that wrong? Is there anything wrong with that history?
Yeah, it's a monocausal theory of history, right? Ronald Reagan ran for president calling the Soviet Union an evil empire. He attacked welfare queens. He made coded statements about race. He said government is the problem, right? It was the whole range of issues. Abortion is a piece of it. But this idea that it is the be-all and end-all of politics is just a flattening of what's been going on for this.
No, that's fair. No, my point there was Reagan didn't just talk about, I missed the point.
Well, I'm not hearing Segall now. I'll defend you, Segall. I'm not hearing Segall say it's the be-all, end-all. And when you just listed those, Michael, what I heard was, okay, yep, so he's shoring up the base on racism. He's shoring up the base on economics. He's shoring up the base. But he also was shoring up, what I'm hearing from Segall, the base evangelicals on this issue of abortion,
No, not just abortion. This is the point. We have the Federalist Society. We have Ed Meese because of the connection between the Supreme Court and abortion. If Roe never happens, and this comes about through legislation, and there's a fight, and 20 states say it's legal, and that's a whole different way Reagan would have presented this. It was presented as unelected life tenure judges using judicial activism to kill fetuses.
Professor Dorf?
It was a two-pronged thing.
Yeah. So long before that happened, there were signs throughout the South saying impeach Earl Warren, right? The Warren court didn't decide Roe. That was based on the Brown against Board of Education and what's sometimes called the rights revolution of criminal suspects. So the Supreme Court, so it was an issue for the right then. And it would have continued to be even without Roe because there was enough other stuff to get people activated, especially race. I think that, however important abortion is, and I think it's important in our politics, race is the original sin of American constitutional democracy and continues to be a huge motivator for people. And again, right, politics is dynamic. So you take out abortion, it's not the case that everything else remains the same. You'll get a sort of very motivated politicians will use other wedge issues, and they've got plenty of them to drive things. So, again, I'm not saying that what Eric's describing is impossible. It's possible. It's just I want to say that there's so much else going on that it seems to me pretty, bold to hope you lose something in the hope that you then win as a result of losing.
Well, when Mike says bold. Lose something, when Mike says lose something, that's a really important point we need to talk about. I think about abortion generally, leaving you inside this specific issue. What do we lose if I think Mike agrees that Justice Roberts is not just going to reverse the Louisiana law and say, we were right the first time, and Casey is right, and go on doing your business the same. That could happen, but it's extremely unlikely. So, right, Mike?
I think there are any number of possibilities. They could reverse and say, you got to follow Whole Woman's Health, the Texas case. They could affirm and say Louisiana is different from Texas. They could affirm and say the Texas case was wrong, but we're not reversing Casey and Roe, or they could reverse the whole thing.
I think the likeliest scenario is they make the undue burden test, which is clearly the law of the land, much more diluted after this June. That's the most likely.
I don't know what the hell you just said. So
say again.
You said I don't know what you just said.
Let me tell you. So the law on abortion today is states can regulate abortion, but they can't put an undue burden in the way of women seeking.
Which is what the Louisiana case does. Yeah.
And just 4 years ago, Justice Kennedy, kind of surprisingly, Mike can speak to that more than I can, but I think kind of surprisingly, joined Justice Breyer's opinion, which made the undue burden test a real thing. Like it was hard for states to get around that. Now Louisiana is trying to do the same thing Texas did. And I think if you had to bet your life on it, you would bet that they're going to uphold the Louisiana law and make the undue burden test easier for states to meet.
So there's a lot more to this, and I'll let you make final points if you want, if you feel like you haven't. I want everybody to go read both these pieces at dorfonlaw.org, Segall's and, of course, Michael Dorfman's, because it is such an important issue, obviously, and we're talking about this upcoming election, and we're talking about what animates voters, and for a lot of reasons it's really important. But since I have you both here, I really do want to talk just a little bit more, if we can, about the other cases that the Supreme Court is deciding on. Are there any other closing points on this issue of abortion and how it does or does not animate voters?
No, I'm happy to leave it there.
Okay.
Drive people to my blog for follow-up.
There you go. Drive to the blog. Okay, so we don't have time for all of them, every case, but there are big decisions coming down from the court potentially. I guess they can always punt. But on guns, on Trump's taxes, what are the 6 cases? And then I'm going to pick, like it's a game show, which ones that we discuss. And both of you guys are so good at this off the cuff. So, Segall, what are the 6 issues?
Well, the case I'm most worried about is a Montana religion case, and we don't have to go into all the specific facts, but the Supreme Court might hold this term, that if a state decides to give money to private non-religious schools, just because we want kids to be smarter, they have to give money indirectly to private religious schools. In other words, it puts states to the choice. Okay. If you want to help children in private schools, you got to help.
So that's a religion case,
and I'm worried about it a lot.
Next.
Okay, that's one big case. Mike, go ahead.
So I would put the Trump financial records cases, and there are actually 2 of them. It's technically more than 2, but there are really two main cases. One involves the ability of Congress to subpoena the president's financial records, and another one involves a New York grand jury, or in this case, the New York official, but the case relates ultimately to grand jury subpoena power of state officials to get at the president's financial records. And to my mind, the more important cases involve the congressional committees, because I think there's at least a decent federalism argument that states oughtn't to be trying to supervise the president for obvious reasons. But that case tees up a very important question about the ability of Congress to oversee the presidency.
And I think Mike and I agree. I wrote a piece on this for the Harvard Law Review blog. The Congress should be able to get the president's tax returns in this situation. And not because it's Trump, not because of how I want the action to come out, because I think Congress needs to have that power.
How could the public decide how they feel if there's no oversight about what your financial interests are in general? Mike? Like, if I don't know where your money's tied up, then I don't have the full picture of whether or not I should vote for you for mayor.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And it implicates all sorts of other questions, like, is the president using the powers of his office for personal financial gain? It certainly is relevant to impeachment, and the position that the Trump people have taken basically leaves Congress with no ability whatsoever to supervise the executive branch.
Even if he shot somebody on Fifth Avenue.
All right, so we've got the Montana religious school case. You've got Trump's taxes. There's a guns case, isn't there, Professor Dorf?
Yeah, so the gun case comes out of New York City, which had a law that made it essentially impossible to have a gun, and then they loosened it a little bit so that you can now you can transport it in certain ways to like a shooting range. But the fundamental question that the case seems to present is whether the right to keep and bear arms, which the court said in a couple of cases in 2008 and 2010, whether that includes only a right to armed self-defense in your home, or whether you can go about in public carrying a gun. And obviously that implicates public safety, because in many cities, right, there are laws about carrying guns in public, either concealed or openly. there's a threshold question in the case as to whether it's moot, given that the city repealed the law that was at issue and replaced it with a different one. But it looks like the justices are determined to reach the question.
All right.
Pete, one thing about that case, just for in non-legal terms, the idea that New York City would be prohibited by the Constitution from saying no guns in Times Square. We just don't want guns in Times Square, or we don't want, or San Francisco saying we don't want guns in Fisherman's Wharf. It's so obscene and so absurd that it's barely tolerable to even utter that.
You agree with that, Michael?
Sorry, I have to unmute my microphone because my dog was barking a moment ago.
We welcome that here on the show.
Okay, so you can as you were, Bill.
I'm surprised the dog is let into the New York Public Library.
Well, he's masquerading as a service dog.
You fraud, you.
Yeah. Yes, I agree with that. I mean, it's an irony, right, that the justices who are most adamant in favor of gun rights also purport to care about federalism. And you would think that this is an area where you allow states and localities to chart their own course.
All right. So guns, religious schools getting funding, Trump's taxes. And of course, we spent most of this time talking about abortion. So that's 4. Segall, what's the next of the 6?
There's a case that I haven't studied. Maybe Mike has, so I'll defer to him if he has. The faithless elector case seems to be a very important case. Mike, you want to take that one? Because I have not.
Yeah, sure. So the Electoral College, as we know, is this horrible artifact of the founding of the Constitution. The question that posed is whether a state can basically remove an elector who casts a ballot for somebody other than the person they were chosen for. So in the particular case, this was an elector from Colorado who was chosen for the Democratic Party slate. He didn't like Hillary Clinton, and so he cast his ballot for John Kasich, of all things. And then the state removed him and said, no, you can't cast that ballot. And so someone else cast it instead for Clinton. And the question was whether he, as an elector, had a constitutional right to vote in the same way that you or I might have a constitutional right to vote for a candidate we choose. Now, the great irony here is that you and I don't have a constitutional right to vote, at least in presidential elections. Our right to vote in a presidential election is determined by Article 2 of the Constitution and the 12th Amendment, which collectively leave it up to the state legislature to define what rights we have. So the case is not that important for this particular issue. It's potentially extremely important, I think, for the coming election, because depending on the course of the pandemic, you could see something like what happened in Wisconsin a few weeks ago, leading one state or another to decide, we're not going to have an election. We're not going to have a convention.
Wow. Holy cow, that last point. I mean, I was not so interested in this when Segall explained it to me before.
I saw you falling asleep.
Well, when you use the Wisconsin point, I mean, I didn't know about that, the constitutional rights to vote. I'm glad you explained it. All right, and I just realized.
One more case.
Well, I realized, by the way, that I've been saying there's these 6 cases, but there's a bunch of cases. These are 6 that you've highlighted to me. So maybe.
Well, there's one more constitutional case that the facts are too kind of dull to go into, but get into the question. When can Congress limit the president's ability to fire the heads of agencies? And this separation of powers case, which is very dry, has enormous implications for the separation of powers. And the president wants to have...
You can't sex it up?
No, I don't think so.
Maybe Michael can. He seems to be able to...
I mean, the idea is, can Congress limit the president's ability to fire the heads of independent agencies?
Why isn't that interesting to me? That's interesting. That's sexy.
Well, the sexy part of it is it goes to the whole unitary executive idea.
Oh, now you're losing.
That people have probably heard about. And it goes to really, can Congress have independent agencies? That's where we're heading on this.
Can Congress have independent agencies?
Create independent agencies.
Yeah, so think about the Federal Election Commission, the federal...
What is he? What breed is that?
Sorry.
That's fine. What breed?
So I have 3 dogs here. I'll turn off the virtual background.
No!
So you can actually
It'll ruin everything. What are we about? It'd be hilarious. Oh my gosh.
Hey.
It was going to be hilarious if you turned off your virtual background and it was actually something even more elaborate. Look at that pup.
That's Chewy. That's Blue in the background there. Hey, Blue, come in and say hello.
I would show my dogs, but they're on Twitter all the time.
Oh, that's true. You got yours as well.
The third one is a husky.
Oh, wow.
All right.
Beauties.
So, these federal agencies it's very important that they have some degree of independence because they serve functions that we want politically insulated. So just take the Federal Reserve, right? Trump is constantly threatening to fire the head of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, even though he appointed him, because Powell is
not an exception to the rule. That is the rule.
Right. That's right. Powell is actually doing his job of trying to navigate a sound course between, inflation and unemployment. And especially now that means, pumping the economy full of money. And it's important that the Federal Reserve be independent of politics, because we know that otherwise what presidents are tempted to do is right before an election campaign, they flood the economy with cheap money, which is good in the short term, but it's a sugar high, and then it typically leads to a downturn. And you can do that in reverse as well. But that's just one agency. There are lots of agencies where it's important to have experts who are somewhat insulated from politics. But there's this movement on the right, which Eric correctly calls this unitary executive, that says that, no, you can't have any of that, because the Constitution has an Article 1, an Article 2, and Article 3. 1 is Congress, 3 is the courts, 2 is the president. There's nothing in between 1 and 2. There's no Article 1.5 for a branch that's sort of not directly supervised by the president. And so they want everybody to have to answer directly to the president, which is very dangerous, even when you have a normal president. Yeah. It's especially dangerous.
All right, so final question, gentlemen. Final question, which is very relevant to what is happening right now. There's a huge constitutional question about the power of the federal government versus the states on a number of issues. But the president of the United States last week says, I have total, complete authority, which every single legal scholar said the guy has no idea what he's talking about, even those who generally support him. That being said, now you've got the attorney general giving him cover in terms of this whole reopen the government thing. So the question for both of you is, who has the power to tell states that they can or cannot close, or they can or cannot open? And what does Attorney General Barr's recent paper, memo, idea?
No, he was on Hugh Hewitt's show, Pete.
Oh, how great! I've been on Hugh Hewitt's show too. It's a real treat.
It may have been Eric Erickson's show. I think it was Hugh. I've been on Hugh Hewitt's show.
Yeah, what
too.
a treat.
Awesome.
Anyway, Michael Dorf, Professor Dorf, what is the constitutional interpretation of the power of states over the federal government when it comes to opening and closing, something America is not used to closing, okay, like any other country is?
Trump is wrong, but he's not wrong in the way that most people say, right? That is, my governor, Andrew Cuomo, said that Trump doesn't understand principles of federalism. Well, it's true that Trump doesn't understand principles of federalism, but that wasn't the problem. Congress could, in my view, open or close the economy throughout the country. And if it did so, it would preempt, that is to say, displace any contrary state law. Congress could even delegate to the president the power to open or close the economy, right? So the problem isn't that the federal government lacks the power over the states here. The federal government does have that power, subject to concerns around the edges about the scope of the power to regulate interstate commerce. But the president doesn't have that power unilaterally. There's no statute that authorizes him to override
the federal government has the ability to do a lot of this, but the legislative branch,
Correct.
not the executive branch.
That's right.
Hold on. Now, Mike and I agree on this 100%, and actually we agree on many things. But here's the irony about this that just makes me want to kill myself.
Oh, dear.
The Republican part, not kill myself, but it makes me very upset. The president presumably is a Republican and a member of the Republican Party. And it is the Republican Party who destroyed Obama, to some significant degree, impaired Obamacare because of arguments that the federal government didn't have powers like this. And the idea that now the Republican Party would stand behind somebody who would say, frankly, either the president or Congress could do. I mean, Mike and I agree constitutionally they could do it. If you ask Randy Barnett, I'd love to hear what he would say, because Randy spent most of his, decade of the early 2000s arguing for the limited power of the federal
situational
government.
Ethics.
No. Randy says the government can't do it. I debated him recently. It's online somewhere on like The Hill or something, some magazine like that.
Right.
So he's consistent. But you're right that the Republican Party has fallen into line behind Trump on this, and that just shows again the point I was making earlier that our politics are tribal. It's not about having a consistent position. It's about supporting your team.
Hold on. So Randy said the government could not do it. Right. That's what I would expect him to say. Good for him. I mean, that's good for him. But the Republican, I'm talking about politics now, which obviously is situational and all that. But the idea that the Republican Party would take the position the federal government could require the states to open or close is inconsistent with everything they said from 2010 to 2016.
Let me try to push back on one thing, Michael, in general, when people say this, and I don't know why it's resonating when you say it, but when you say our politics are tribal, isn't that is it a false equivalency in that we're partisan in many ways and tribal in many ways, but Trump is more like a cult leader, and it's more like, I don't think, like the fight between progressive liberal Democrats, whatever you want to call them, over the progressive wing and the quote moderate wing is real, and it's based on policies, generally speaking. And so are they all tribal, or is it more Trump doctrine? Not even, because it's not conservative or Republican doctrine. It's just what he says goes.
Yeah, so yes, right. By saying politics are tribal, I don't mean to deny that there are actual policy disputes and that they have important political consequences. But long before Trump, you saw this phenomenon, right? Think about the following question. Why is it that people who are generally pro-life on abortion also favor robust Second Amendment rights, right? The two things have nothing to do with each other. Right. And yet, and you can go down the list and find these correlations. And it's because the identity comes first and then the issue alignments go along with them.
Eric Posner, the son of retired Judge Richard Posner, wrote a book on American demagoguery. What was Huey Long, Mike? I'm having a brain seizure.
He's a demagogue.
Demagogue, right. Eric wrote a book on demagogues. And when we're talking about people like Huey Long and Trump, and there are a few others, I think you're right, Pete. I think the normal rules don't come into play. And we have a much more cult-like system of politics where he could say anything. I don't think Jimmy Carter or George Bush could have said anything and his followers would have gone, well, that's fine. I think Trump can say anything. I'll shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue, and my followers would still support
me.
Well,
he drank chlorine or whatever the hell he calls it. I mean, like, or don't, whatever it is. These are life and death. He's telling people in there, not all of them, but a lot of them are, listen, don't get vaccinated. Don't get vaccinated.
What I've been tweeting a lot about recently is the Federalist Society, which began in the early 80s, used to stand for basically three principles.
The Federalist Society, yeah.
Yeah, well, this is huge because Trump is aligned with the Federalist Society, and the executive vice president was in the White House picking his judges. This is such an irony. The Federalist Society began committed to limited judicial review. That's out the window. That's not a Trump thing. But also separation of powers and federalism. Like, that's what they claim to be all about. And Trump is eviscerating, and Barr is eviscerating separation of powers and federalism across the board. And yet, it seems like the Federalist Society's leadership is still supporting it. And that's just, I don't know what to do with that.
Well, a lot to be said about that.
Mike, do you disagree with that? Any of that?
No, I don't disagree. I mean, there used to be this strong divide within the Republican coalition between sort of the Wall Street wing and the social conservative wing. And what you've described as the Federalist Society position was a kind of a bridge, right? It's limited government and, limited judiciary. Each gets what they want. I think what's happened, and you saw this in the amazing response to Barr's speech at the Federalist Society, which was sort of down the line, social conservative nationalist, not what we think of as sort of the libertarian wing of the Republican Party, but he got a tremendous response. I think what you've seen is a kind of realignment so that one almost doesn't even notice the difference between these wins. Yes, there are never Trump Republicans, but they get, they get sort of shunted out of the party entirely, so that, it has become, as you said, Pete, almost a cult of personality.
Yeah. Which is something that will be.
When it's the worst person ever to have that, to lead that cult, it's a real problem.
Well, usually they're pretty bad people. I'm watching that David Koresh thing on Netflix. I'm obsessed with it. It's fascinating. Yeah. Everybody has to be celibate at the place, but him. I mean, that's how do you convince people? Married men.
Well, I mean, Pete. Trump saying my followers would follow me if I shot somebody on Fifth Avenue is not that different.
The exact equivalent would be Trump going, listen, I'm going to fuck your wife, and you're going to have to be okay with it. and people be like, all right. I mean, I can't imagine. All right, that was pretty extreme. All right.
Now my kids can't watch this. Thanks a lot.
I'm sorry. And now, I was going to say, hopefully we can post this on the blog too, maybe. I don't know if you can accommodate video. But gentlemen, I really appreciate an hour of your time joining me. What a fascinating discussion to have both of your voices. I highly recommend folks go to Dorf On Law, favorite it on your favorite internet browser, and read what these guys are writing, and everybody else is writing on that blog as well. And what else do I need to plug here? Professor Dorf, Cornell University, thank you very much. Anything else I need to plug?
That does it for me. Thanks so much. It was fun to be here.
Segall, you good?
I'm good, Pete, except for the Daisy Alex thing, which I think you did on purpose.
I have no idea who this person is that it says you are on, but it's got to be on your end, and I highly recommend you ask your kids. Thanks, Daisy. All right, guys. Talk to you soon. Thank you.
Bye.
All right. How about that? Thank you very much for joining me in that conversation. Would love to hear what you think about it. Who's right? Who's wrong? What would you add to it? What would you argue? That is Eric Segall and Michael Dorf. And go read Dorf On Law. Follow them on Twitter. Everything is linked in the show notes. Subscribe to the podcast with a paid subscription at patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Cannot do this without you. And there's going to be a whole lot more voices as I'm ramping up to do this. More guests every day, maybe longer shows. You can pick and choose what you want to hear, and you get to help produce the show by telling me what you want to hear and having your voice heard. So please sign up for a paid subscription. I really appreciate that. And let me know how you're doing. Let me know what your life is about. Let me know what you're an expert on. Let me know what you want to hear on this podcast. I look forward to connecting with you and talking to you each and every day right here on Stand Up.